Looks pretty good.
Alright. Good to go? Alright, we can end that. That's fine. You don't have to have this. Alright, so episode 1, podcast number 1. Today, starting this out for the first time, so we're going to see how it goes. Today we're doing Millennials in Politics, and I have with me my good cousin Peter. Peter.
Hello, my name is Peter.
Alright. So where we're at, what we're doing, and kind of a little bit of your background, this kind of thing.
Okay, so like I said, my name is Peter. I'm from the New York, New Jersey area. Grew up in New Jersey, but spent a lot of time in the city. Daniel came on up to New York, and we're here in Midtown East. Been hanging out, exploring the city, trying to stay out of the rain, and now here we are sitting down, doing a little bit of talking about some
That's
cool
true.
stuff.
This entire weekend, or so far, it's only Saturday, and we were just walking around, and you were telling me about how every time other people come in to visit and stuff like that too, it's always like a rainy, crappy weekend and things like that.
It always works out that way. When you have company, wherever you are, you get the bad weather, traffic, whatever it is, whatever you want to avoid. When the company visits, that's what happens.
Yeah. So, all right, to get on the topic a little bit right now too. So I said millennials in politics exactly, and for you, I know specifically that that's what you focused on in college, and you did internships in the DC area and stuff like that. I know you worked with a Congress representative from Staten Island, right? Correct, and a Republican as well.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so the first thing I kind of want to get into this day, I remember back when you were in DC a couple years ago too, and I lived near DC, that we had just a casual conversation or something like that, and you talked about how people our age, millennials, like younger, are more socially liberal, and it doesn't matter if you're raised, Republican or Democrat, anything like that. Just like we let things go a little bit easier, like gay marriage supporting, marijuana reform, all that kind of stuff like that. So, what do you mean by that exactly? And are there other kind of good examples that we can maybe talk about and discuss?
I guess what I've noticed from basic discourse and different studies here and there is people between the ages 18 and 34. You want to go even higher.
Yeah.
Basically, people born after 1980 are just much more open to things that are considered generally socially liberal. So, like you mentioned, gay marriage, the legalization of cannabis, prison reform,
Sure.
relationships, in the past, relationships between people was much more regimented and much more conservative. Now people are much more open. I just think that, in general, whether you find yourself on the map politically, these social issues, they're kind of the gotcha issues. They're kind of it's easy to put a headline out or something. I'm for gay marriage. I'm for legalizing weed. I'm for unrestricted access to abortion. So these kind of pop on issues, generally you consider more on the left. So if you're one person only interested in one thing like that, you kind of are picked up pretty early on by the left at our age because of those specific issues. And I think that if you're a Republican or you're on the right and you want to keep yourself relevant, it's important to evolve.
Exactly.
With the youngest people that are turning 18 and are able to vote. Now that doesn't mean abandon your principles per se, but you can just look at the Gallup poll. I mean, if you ask people in the year 2000, what percentage of people wanted to thought gay marriage should be legal, was under 50%.
Yeah.
15 years later, in 2015, it was over 60%. So you can see in just 15 years something that both parties were against. I mean, Barack Obama in 2008, 2012 ran on not supporting gay marriage.
Yeah, that's exactly too. He said it's between a man and a wife, and that's the way it is. And then, 4 or 5 years later, it changed the tune completely because of the popularity of it as well.
Things change quickly, and if I mean, he's kind of considered one of the, standard bearers of the progressive cause. And in 2018, so just 10 years ago, he ran not supporting gay marriage. So it's really interesting. You can see people our age have changed and are more socially liberal in some things, but I think the society as a whole in the past 15 years has kind of had like a super quick.
It's had to catch up kind of to the pace of the ideas behind it.
People have just changed their opinion on abortion, on gay marriage, on cannabis. I mean, you can look at the polls for the last 15 years of cannabis.
Exactly.
It just steadily goes up with gay marriage. Things I think have changed a lot quicker than maybe people who've been in politics their whole life are comfortable with or want to acknowledge. So if you're a political strategist and you've been working for Democrats or Republicans since 1995, the core issues that you were getting your candidate to platform on in 1995 were totally different in 2015, or totally different this
you said too, the Republican Party or even just more conservative ideology has to kind of play catch up in some aspects, but at the same time not sacrifice its soul or its values or principles that go along with that. Because even like we were talking about, you mentioned earlier, people have different, more loose standards of relationships or things like that. I think I looked at a statistic and it said something like, in the past 5 years or so, about 50% of just children that being born are born out of wedlock. So they don't have their parents necessarily together. They might be later on. They might get married down the road. They might not. And kind of even how that would affect and how that could be a socially conservative view that people shouldn't be doing this, or a socially liberal view saying that this is just how it is, and marriage and that aspect might change a little bit. And I think that has probably a lot to say on your political views, because how you're raised and who you're raised by and the context it is really affects that as well.
Yeah, you just said something actually pretty interesting that kind of perked up my ears when you mentioned like abandoning your principles or giving up your principles. And I actually think the Republican Party has an opportunity to really actually be more true to what it's kind of was founded on, is small government, personal responsibility, personal choices. So if you look at these different things like gay marriage, like the legalization of certain drugs or abortion, these can be libertarian issues, issues on the right where, gay marriage, that's a personal choice. We shouldn't have the government involved in marriage. So if two men want to get married, sure, that's something you can, put under the flag of, libertarian small government type thing. And the same thing with legalization of drugs. If somebody wants to personally use this or that in their own, setting and not in public, a more left, kind of total government view would be to, break in there and stop that. But if you want to look at it from a traditional libertarian point of view, which I think fits on the standard of the right, is you can say, personal responsibility, personal choices, less government. So instead of abandoning principles, I think the Republican Party, if they can do a better job of rebranding themselves, but they also, a big portion of Republican voters are socially conservative voters. So, so in elections, you have to find a block of voters, whether you're Democrat or Republican, that you can mobilize.
Exactly. So for a little bit of a better frame of reference, so I know you're obviously more kind of on the right-leaning conservative bend to it. So maybe say exactly like if you get a background for yourself for that, and as well as maybe some issues that maybe you might deviate on, like the more conservative platform that maybe relate more to us, as our specific generation, as opposed to older people or people on the other side of the aisle.
I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about party labels, party ideology, and where you stand. And what I've found is that it's so hard to put yourself in one tent today, which when it comes
so many different directions.
When it comes down to a vote, most people nowadays you vote one ticket, down the ticket Democrat or down the ticket Republican. There used to be people that, like in the 1980s, they called them Reagan Democrats. They voted for the representative Democrat, senator Democrat, governor Democrat, but they liked Reagan, so you voted Republican on top of the ticket. You don't really see that today. It's not so you can't imagine somebody voted for Hillary and then on the rest of the ticket was Republican, or voted for Trump on the rest of the ticket was Democrat.
Yeah, there's definitely a lack of nuance or specific deviation between those issues, because if you're not all in on one side or all in on the other side, I feel like you could kind of get picked off politically in the sense that you're not actually playing for that team. You're either just saying one thing and doing another just to save face or something along those lines.
Yeah, and this kind of gets back to what we talked about earlier, where the one issue that picks you up. So are you strong into abortion? You don't really know much. You're not really interested in anything else. But if you're strong in abortion and you think there should be open access, you're going to vote Democrat. Whereas you may totally disagree on the taxes of Democrats or immigration plans of Democrats or a whole wide of issues. But if that one issue draws you out, then you're kind of you're stuck there. And I feel a similar way with the Republican Party, because I think a lot of people my age who consider themselves more conservative are conservative in the sense of small government, lower taxes, less government programs.
And just doing things by yourself rather than having the government just, help you out along the way.
So those are core principles that are important to me, but I also don't think that you should be arrested and go to jail if you have marijuana. I think the best way to regulate it would be in stores like alcohol, because, if you ask high schoolers what's easier to get, a gram of weed or a handle of vodka, generally the answer is the gram of weed, because drug dealers don't ID you, they don't card you, there's no alternative.
You can get it somewhere else.
But if you want to get alcohol, somebody has to have a fake ID, or your friend has an older brother or something, or you go, like in the movies, you go outside and throw the guy $5 to get you a 6-pack of beer, but when when it's outside of the realm of society, I think it's a problem, and that's why you see so much illicit drug trade. But that doesn't exactly fit in, decriminalizing or legalizing cannabis, gay marriage. I think anybody who wants to get married should be able to get married. I don't think the government should even be involved in it at all.
That's a position too I've heard a lot recently, where get married in church or however you want to do it along that side, and then leave the more financial benefits or not outside of it. And that would create maybe less drama in some aspects.
Yeah, and I mean, if you talk about other hot button kind of issues, a lot of times if let's say there's 10 hot button issues, it's like you have a checklist and you're like, okay, this. Well, 4 of them I'm on the Republican side, but 6 of them, and the 6 that are really important are me on the Democrat side, so I guess I'm going to vote Democrat. And to kind of answer your question, to go all the way back to that, to my background, what I believe,
exactly.
I don't think that there's really a way people can identify themselves wholeheartedly, because if you're a Republican nowadays, you agree with everything Republicans do, and the left thinks you're a monster. And if you're a Democrat, you agree with everything the Democrats do, and the right thinks you're monsters. But I think right now, just because of the fractured nature of politics, I think obviously we're in a two-party system, so 2 parties are rewarded in the way our government's set up. I think that a third party wouldn't be able to win an election, but I feel like we almost have like 4 groups of people right now.
Exactly. So that was a perfect segue into kind of the second issue that I want to talk about, is that polarization. So north, south, east, west, liberal, Republican, something like that. And it's just getting further and further, and then the centrist is kind of just disappearing naturally. So, and I was looking at some other statistics from Pew Poll data, and they're saying like people our age, like 70% or something like that, want a third party system, or at least have other voices that are not just, left, right, blue, red. And kind of how would you see maybe something would work into the system that way? Would it be feasible? Is it in the next 5-10 years? Would it look more like a European kind of democracy where you have it a lot more tiered and there's a lot more people, I guess, that you could really, that would more specifically fit, the way you saw your values reflected in society?
So we will never see a system like the Europeans have in the United States unless we change our system of government, because we have a federal system that just the way it's set up, and it prioritizes and benefits the two-party system, so 2 parties will always dominate, whereas if you have a parliamentary system, which is more common in Europe, you have the ability for smaller parties to come in. But I think the problem is if you live in West Virginia and you're a Joe Manchin Democrat, you're in the same tentpole, you're in the same party as a Maxine Waters California Democrat or an Elizabeth Warren Massachusetts Democrat, and I think those people couldn't be any more different. Just like if you're a Republican from Georgia, you're a lot different than a Republican, say, in Arizona.
Yeah.
Or if you're a Republican in Utah, that's quite different than maybe a fiscal Republican in New York, who somebody who works in New York City is tired of the high taxes and believes in lower taxes, but they may not be as socially conservative like somebody down south. So I almost feel like we need 4 parties. We need like the Maxine Waters, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party. Then you need centrist Democrats like the Joe Manchins, the Claire McCaskills, senators from Rust Belt states. And then you have a Senate Republican, so somebody like a Rubio, a John Kasich. But then you also have people who are farther to the right. You have maybe a Ted Cruz. Rand Paul, not necessarily farther to the right socially, but he's right in terms of libertarian, small government things. Yeah. So now 4 is just a number you can pull out of the sky, but it does seem like the people who can scream the loudest. So Trump will say something that people consider inflammatory, or Maxine Waters will say something that you consider inflammatory, but those are the loudest speakers in
that's all you hear
in the group. So everybody who's Republican is lock, stock with Trump. Everything down the line. Everybody who's Maxine Waters is with her. So it's a very interesting time in politics, because what you saw in the 2016 election was third parties grew a larger share than they had in a very, very long time, because people were just
so fed up.
Long-time Republicans, long-time Democrats were like, I don't like either of my choices. And it's interesting because people talk about the unlikelihood of Trump winning an election. I mean, the Democrats probably ran the one candidate that had as much baggage as he did, and he was able to pull into the mud with him.
Exactly. And
that's I mean, I think the voter turnout was 54-55%. That's not. In a Western country that has a 200-year history of democracy, when you have 55% of the people coming out, which is not a crazy amount lower than normal election. I think it was only 1 or 2% lower turnout than the 2012 election, but it's 1 or 2% of a nation of 350 million people makes a difference.
Exactly. So I know we were discussing before the podcast started, about how different media platforms affect people like millennials versus baby boomers versus Generation X. And I wanted to specifically talk about the divide between the generations and how, over 70% of people our age get their media from Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever you want to call it for that, while our parents and even grandparents and stuff are ingesting media in a different way. And how do you think that'll affect us going on further down the line?
Yeah, well, I think the polarization you see in society is kind of represented in the way media has fractured.
Mm-hmm.
So as we experience increased polarization among society, media has almost reflected that in terms of fracturing. So if you're super conservative, you have your source you can go to. If you're super liberal, you have your source. And before, this wasn't exactly possible when you had the news only on television and print.
Exactly.
You didn't have a major paper that was, a Breitbart in print for the entire country. And you didn't have a Vox or a Salon or anything like that in print for the whole country. So I think if you were of those opinions, you had to kind of stay to the mainstream sources. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of similar with TV now. If you're not on Fox, CNN, or MSNBC, you didn't have a primetime show.
Exactly.
But nowadays, primetime is any time of the day when somebody can load up a YouTube video. So you can watch a video of one of your favorite speakers at one of the universities.
And they might not exactly be along those same partisan or narrative lines, where you're getting something that's a little bit of this and then a little bit of something else. So maybe your palette for the politics is expanding more than what previously.
And I think there's something to be said about, on-demand immediate. People our age, so, anybody, I would say under the years of 30, grew up with information at their fingertip tips at any second you wanted.
Exactly.
So who won the 1988, World Series? Well, you look it up, it's there in a second. You don't need to go to the library, find the encyclopedia, and go down through. Yeah. So nowadays, you're not going to turn on the 8 o'clock news to find out what's going on in the day. You might scroll through, you might be on Google News, and you see, oh my gosh, this gun control issue is going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy, I've heard a lot about this. And then you click, you can read the article, read a few articles, and then you maybe take a step back and you're like, I don't know that much about gun control, I don't know that much about abortion. And you can head over to YouTube, or you can check out an article that takes you 10 minutes to read, and you get kind of the basic points. Whereas if there's a gun control thing on Fox News, their contributors probably covering it from a side of supporting the guns, and if there's somebody on CNN, they're covering from a side saying that anybody who wants a gun is, a psychopath. So
yeah, exactly.
Whereas on YouTube, you find someone else, you might be a little better served.
Exactly. So also, like you said, with the immediacy and all of that, it seems like there's a lot of positives, maybe even a net positive at the end of the day, but also some potential downsides, negative factors that you might not think about necessarily. Because my thing is basically, I've heard a lot of talk about echo chambers. So exactly that means just you're hearing exactly what you want to hear, reaffirming it, and it's just bouncing back and forth and making your opinion stronger. So if it's that leaning more in just a straight confirmational bias rather than maybe expanding the discourse, or is that something else there?
Well, it's interesting because that's what you just kind of said is like theory versus practice. In theory, we have access to every argument, every piece of data, anything we could possibly want about a certain topic.
You think you can be more well-informed?
So more people are going to be well-informed, more people are going to read, more people are going to be interested in stuff. But then if you look at practice, that's not exactly what happens.
Exactly.
If you're somebody who reads Breitbart, you're going to read Breitbart, you're going to watch the 8 o'clock programming on, Hannity, you're going to watch Carlson, whoever, and then maybe you follow some people on Twitter that are in your realm, and the same for other people. I think the problem is nowadays, more so than just echo chambers, is when you look at different people who don't even trust anything but somebody that agrees with them. So it's not necessarily trusting a media source, but it's trusting a story. So if you see a story by, News101.com and it says, Trump did this or that, and you don't support Trump, you're
gonna be like, hey, that's what happened.
Or if you saw, this unverified thing on Facebook that you have no idea, it's not, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, but it says, Hillary was doing this or that during the 2016 election, you believe that. So the problem is with all of this advantage people in our time have with all this media and diversity of media, diversity of opinions, and all this information on our fingertips, we really aren't taking advantage of that. And we're using it more, like you said, to confirm our biases. So instead of reading the one article in the New York Times maybe 25 years ago and you feel good, now you're going to read 6 articles, but it's 6 articles telling you the same thing, and you're going to feel so good because, it was on Vox, it was on Salon.
It must be right.
It was on Huffington Post, it was on Mother Jones.
It's got to be correct.
So, these 4 people couldn't have all written about this unless Trump really was trying to, take away people's health care.
Exactly, and at the same time, too, even into those old media platforms, it seems like maybe the negative aspects of the new media, the internet and stuff like that, it's kind of being injected into it in the sense where the New York Times and all those people, they have to have that kind of clickbait mentality to get the views pulling because they're not making it with papers. It's not as popular online as it is at many other places where you could get it for free if you don't have a subscription or if you don't feel like reading through the columns and stuff like that. And at the same time, they're like, well, we're going to get on this, and then at the same time put down that negative thing saying, oh no, we're still the gatekeepers here. But at the same time, who's watching these gatekeepers now that we have all these different sources to look at?
Yeah, it was really funny after the 2016 election, the Washington Post inserted the subline, "Democracy dies in darkness," as if they're, holding the spear to fight against anybody who's coming after democracy. And it's really interesting because a lot of news nowadays has just become tabloid news.
Exactly. No, I agree 100%. It seems like the quality is driven down just for the quantity.
And you talk about like the headlines and the clickbait. The headlines you see on a serious news story from a serious news source nowadays, you used to see when you were at the grocery store, putting your items on the thing, and you saw page 6, you saw the Hollywood Reporter, you saw these, did this and this happen with this person and all those fantastic things. Well, now that's what Rachel Maddow's leading in on MSNBC. That's what the Washington Post opinion pages that bleeds into the non-opinion pages now is everything. It's this one headline's going to get you in, and if you read through the whole article, you might realize it wasn't what the headline was telling you. But a lot of people, you read the first paragraph just to, wow, that headline was what it meant. This X bad thing that I thought, I can now confirm to myself that is exactly what it was.
Yeah, I believe so too, and that's something definitely to follow in the future and see if it leads down more of that similar path that we're talking about, where it kind of degrades the quality of it, or if maybe something new arises out of it and we get a better, more balanced, even wider spectrum of views and ideas to think about. So from there I want to pivot a little bit to, I want to call this kind of section the ascension of the authoritative left. So even you're obviously more on the conservative side of me. I tend to probably think more centrist, but I definitely have some more liberal views, some more conservative views, especially for me in Maryland. I'm a HQL license holder, handgun qualification license, so I'm definitely more like pro-Second Amendment than your average Marylander would probably be or even know about. So I want to talk about more things like 2017 with Evergreen State College in Washington and Brett Weinstein and kind of like the fallout from that, or even if you go back to 2016 in Toronto with Bill C-16 and the Human Rights Tribunal laws about transgender pronouns and preferred pronouns, and for that even specifically, if you didn't call somebody by he or she when they wanted that to, if they changed their gender, then you could be prosecuted, fined, even get jail time for just not titling somebody correctly. Not even in necessarily a malicious way, just you didn't know, or it was just kind of an odd situation. And the fact that is, even people our age who, even if they say they're independent or most likely don't want to put themselves in a certain box, they say that they're going to definitely lean more democratic and vote Democrat. So what does that mean kind of moving forward? Do you think more people would be maybe more centrist or conservative like you and me, or that people would still kind of just have their own ways they grew up, left or right, and kind of follow in his footsteps?
Yeah, well, you really bring up a lot of interesting things, and kind of to get back to the beginning, when you were talking about Evergreen State College and these universities, it's really interesting because if you go back to the 1960s and the free speech movement, universities, college campuses, these locations, this is where all the foot soldiers for the free speech movement were. This is where everything was happening. If you wanted to understand what people were talking and thinking about, you go, that's where it was, the college campus. You come in, you're 18 years old when you get there, you're 21, 22 when you leave. You hopefully aren't a finished product when you get there, and hopefully when you leave you've learned a lot. and you can move on and become smarter. But a lot of that is hearing things that you don't like, you disagree with, or you don't know much about, and you learn. But nowadays, if you look at some of the conservative commentators, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, I wouldn't even put him in the conservative commentator box. Milo, a provocateur, somebody who's there to promote outrage. But all these people, Ben Shapiro went to Berkeley University, literally the ground zero of the free speech movement, and he had to spend, the university had to spend $600,000 on security.
Yeah,
police officers, there was riots.
And they tore down the entire city, basically.
And if you want to talk about the authoritarian or regressive left, this is kind of, to me, looks like where it all starts. The college campuses, the universities, these were the free speech areas. So you went to school, you learned, you kind of got used to the ideas with free speech, and as you grew up, these people who would go to university and college would become the leaders in society. But what we had was a group of people who were not so open to free speech. They liked free speech when you were talking about things that they agree with. So these group of people became professors, and now they're in charge at all these different universities. So if you want to even hear somebody, so you don't know much about politics, and you have somebody from the left coming, a speaker, and you have somebody from the right coming. If you go to the left speaker, there's going to be absolutely no security. There's going to be no problem. But you go to the right speaker, there's going to be a line out the thing. You might have to be patted up. I went to a University of Central Florida speech, and I had the police patted me down and everything.
It's so crazy just to hear somebody speak.
Just somebody talk.
That might not, be exactly 100% what you're lining up with, but it's not a dangerous situation, or at least it shouldn't be, because that discourages people from even doing it in the first place.
So the whole regressive left and free speech, I think, really goes back to the college campuses, and that's kind of the nexus of the issue. You see where it's happening a lot. But one of the major problems to kind of even talk about media anymore is you see no coverage in the mainstream media of these rallies or these protests or these Antifa thugs who come and try to stop the free speech discourse.
Very, very interesting.
So, I think this is because these mainstream media sources have an agenda. The people who are out there trying to stop the conservative commentator from talking, the person on the right, and they might not even be crazy on the right. They're just somebody who doesn't, line up with the lock-stop Democrat message.
At the same time, it's like pulling the whole spectrum, saying you're either extreme this or extreme that, and then you're not able to find any kind of middle ground.
It can't be that if you don't agree with every single thing that the Democratic Party or liberals aspire to, that you're a Nazi. It just can't be that.
That would leave a lot of Nazis roaming around.
They would be running the country.
That would be more than they were in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, so it's just kind of crazy when you think about it. And one of the things I try to get back to is with the mainstream media, tying over to this, is that there's nothing on CNN, there's nothing on MSNBC, there's nothing on CBS 6 o'clock, NBC 6 o'clock news, any of these things, the nightly news. They don't talk about, the protests at Berkeley, the protests at Evergreen.
Or it's just skirted over really quickly.
And Tucker Carlson on Fox now, he's mainstream media. He'll talk about it. He'll bring it up. He'll interview these people. But when you talk about the fracturing of media, a lot of these news sources of media, podcasts, internet,
what we're doing
different
right now,
blog sites, talking. These people are talking about what's going on. So the mainstream media wants to brush over it, but it's happening, and people they're almost accelerating their demise by not talking about what's on the ground. You can't just fit what's into your narrative, because there was a time.
Alright, so we kind of come to the end of our time for right now too. I think starting out about 30 minutes or so for this kind of format's pretty good, and then we'll adjust it from where we go from here. But I would kind of say in summary, we've talked about millennials and politics, so age differences between people obviously older than us, and even, we didn't get into it in this, but maybe another topic too, people 5 or 10 years younger than us, and what is that going to look like different compared to us. We talked about essentially the authoritative left, the kind of dying media platforms, so TV versus internet versus how people are getting their information these days, and also how polarization can kind of either eventually pull us completely apart, or if there's a point where we can't do this anymore and switch it up. So I would say, in closing, maybe give me a good thought or something. I don't know if we've exactly touched on it, or something that you think is really important that we haven't discussed, but that could kind of move this discussion along in the near future.
I guess what I would look at is, I think two big things right now are the fracturing of the media. So we're kind of we're at dawn or dusk, if you want to use either analogy.
Okay.
We're kind of in the middle. You look back, you see the heyday of mainstream media, and you look forward, you can tell it's not going to be there. But we're kind of in that in-between phase.
Twilight,
yeah. So it's really hard to predict what's next. Is there going to be a point? So we're in our early 20s. Is there going to be a point in 15 years where there's no more primetime lineup? Where maybe these political commentators will still release 1-hour shows, but it's not going to be everybody tuning in, eating the popcorn at 8 p.m. to watch it. They'll release it some point throughout the day, and you'll listen to it.
When they watch it.
But that's a podcast. So, but it's very hard to predict. Maybe mainstream media pivots. There's something we can't think about right now. We don't know, but they pivot and they figure out how to survive in a different way.
Kind of like what radio is doing right now to keep up somehow. When you think that's like almost 100 years old platform, that still has a decent enough share of the market where they can make a good amount of money, and they're not being completely crowded out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as newer cars and people continue to buy newer cars, and you're going to be able to get your podcast or your Apple CarPlay, radio is going to have trouble. But I think that you really have to tie this polarization and this fracturing the media landscape together, because the media controls the narrative. The media is what we're talking about. No matter what the new landscape is, the mainstream media still has a power. They're still a juggernaut. So they can kind of control what we're saying. And a lot of times it's hot button issues that they push. And what sells if you're trying to get ratings? That half the country and this half believes in one thing and everybody hates each other and they're fighting? Or are you going to get viewers and, hey, everybody came together and there was a compromise. Republicans weren't super happy, Democrats weren't super happy, but this happened. Or the two sides disagree a lot, but they realize, we're all in the same country.
Exactly.
We're brothers, we're sisters here. We're gonna figure this out.
Yeah.
That's not sexy television, and that doesn't sell.
That's a good point.
So I feel like the mainstream media, the established media, the traditional media, fuels a lot of the polarization in our country. Now, like I said, it's so hard to predict what's coming next. So maybe what comes next is hyperpolarization. We think we're polarized now. Maybe it's more polarization. Maybe in the future, the way media changes, it won't be as polarized. I think in 2018, it's very difficult to predict what's coming next. But I think we can all almost guarantee that 2030 is going to look a lot different in the media landscape than it is today.
It's very interesting because, exactly what you said. So a variation of opinions and views and stuff, and constant discourse between two people and two sides probably is going to err definitely more on the side of the solution rather than the problem, because I feel like that way people would be like, oh, we have a lot more in common, you're not the devil, I'm not the devil. And that even doing things like this too, where you can have a longer drawn out discussion that you can't have, like we said, on these traditional media platforms, that I believe that's definitely more of the way forward, and then we could kind of ride that into the future. But all right, that will conclude podcast episode 1, Millennials and Politics. This has been my cousin Peter. I'm Daniel, and we'll catch you next time. Like, comment, just share, and subscribe.
Thank you very much.
All right.